Okay, so tell me about your research.
Yeah, so I'm involved in a couple of different areas. Up here with David and Ben, we're primarily doing what's called continuous time reinforcement learning, which is a form of stochastic optimal control. It takes reinforcement learning and starts from its control formulation that's rooted in classical mathematics, and you work that all the way through to its natural conclusion, and only then do you discretize and actually obtain an algorithm to do reinforcement learning. But you really start from control theory, and everything is inspired by stochastic optimal control. And so that's the area that I'm working with up here. Ultimately, you do get RL algorithms, and that's something that's kind of a hot topic right now is reinforcement learning. But those RL algorithms look a little different than what you would expect if you loaded up, the gymnasium package in Python or something like that and just ran stuff out of the box. It's a little different than some of the more discrete time algorithms that have really flourished on, social media and things like that about what reinforcement learning is. And so what we do is a little more mathematical, but at the end of the day, you don't have to make as many assumptions because it all really flows from the classical mathematics. So we're doing that with a lot of different insurance problems, and we're some of the first folks to bring that over from finance to insurance. And so we're looking at optimal reinsurance problems, kind of recast under this reinforcement learning light. We're looking at moral hazard problems, kind of recast under this reinforcement learning light. And next, we're looking more towards dividends, ruin, and all of the sort of classical actuarial control problems, just recast with this new way of looking at it, where really you don't have to know anything about the risk process. You kind of have this model-free approach, and you learn the parameters of the risk process kind of as you go along. So I think that has a lot of implications for emerging markets, and a lot of implications for how actuaries deal with uncertainty. And so that's one area that I'm working on. And then I'm also really interested in kind of another hot topic in the space right now, decentralized risk sharing. And so I'm actually working with a professor out of KU Leuven on that. His name's Jan Donna, and so he's kind of famous guy around these parts. But he's really nice guy, and he's worked with me now on one paper that gets really close to insurance, but without an insurer. And so you end up not having somebody that's doing those reserving calculations and making sure that every single claim is accounted for. But ultimately, you end up with something that seems to be a little bit more attractive, I guess, to financial markets. And so we're looking at, actually, that's something else that maybe you and I need to talk about with about how to implement this actually in an app or something like that. The way that they do Friendsurance in Germany, and the way that they do some of these risk sharing applications in China and things like that. That's something that I think has a lot of potential and is something that's maybe going to be pretty attractive to folks. And then we're also working on moral hazard problems with risk sharing. So when you don't have an insurance company and you're just sharing the risk among friends, more or less, kind of like you have these ideas of micro financial transactions where you loan small amounts of money just between individual parties, decentralized finance, right? And so now you have decentralized insurance where there's no insurer, but when you have a claim, you kind of go to your friends and everybody kind of helps everybody else out. And
Oh,
so it's
okay.
it's this idea of mutual aid, right? And so
Mm.
this goes all the way back to like mutual insurance companies and things like that. And so it really it has a lot of historical roots, but now with the advent of a lot of these technologies, matter of fact, I'm having a meeting tomorrow with an Italian CEO of a group called Insuro, and what they do is everything's on blockchain. And so they worked with these farmers in Kenya and a couple other countries in Africa. And whenever there's really bad weather that knocks out their crops, they have these micro that well they what they do is they everything's parametric. So you have one spot where you measure, say, the wind speed, for example. And if the wind speed's above that threshold, then they pay out small amounts to these farmers so that they can, restore their equipment or buy new seeds or do the replanting, all this kind of stuff. But everything's decentralized, right? Well, everything's on blockchain, I should say. So everything's with cryptocurrency to actually do these payments and make these transactions happen. And so that's really blown up. The ability to do microtransactions is I mean, you have apps in certain kind, yeah, like Venmo and these kinds of things where you can do stuff like that, PayPal, where you can exchange money really easily. But the advent of cryptocurrency has really helped this space to kind of explode, especially in developing countries, which are arguably the groups that need these risk sharing arrangements the most, because they don't necessarily have traditional insurers that are going in there doing crop insurance and things like that. And so I'm having a call with him tomorrow on some of this reinforcement learning stuff and how maybe he can apply it to some of his pricing and things like that. But we'll see. But there's a lot of really exciting stuff going on in that space right now too, and so I'm glad to be a part of that. So those are kind of my two big areas: is risk sharing and reinforcement learning. Totally disconnected, but
Well,
I
I
love them both equally.
I think this is exciting because, anybody who is thinking, okay, I'm going to get my undergraduate degree and go work for an insurance company, after listening to you describe not so much your research, but how your research gets applied in the
Mhm.
real world. I mean, there's just so many opportunities there. You'd think that that would really excite somebody to say, okay, I'd like to learn more about XYZ topic. And then you just open the window and then there's all these opportunities out there. It's amazing.
Well, and that's what I'm really hopeful for, is that somebody, can hear my story and say, oh, maybe that's something that I'd like to go do too. And so my office mate Zach and my advisors and I, we went down actually to the University of Texas and talked to undergraduates about some of the applications of the research that we're doing. And David and Ben spoke a little bit more on kind of the classical areas of research and kind of some of the things that they've worked on in the past. But Zach and I really were talking about applications moving forward of our research. And I think that got a lot of people fired up and we had a lot of questions. But that's not a talk that you see going on every day in universities, is to undergraduates to say, look, this is another option that's available to you if you're excited by it. And that's the thing, is you have to be excited by it. And it takes kind of a special kind of person to get really fired up about doing stuff like that, you know.
Let me ask you about something. I should really ask you what reinforcement learning is, because I don't want
Sure.
but I'm not gonna ask that right now, because I have a really more practical question. So I do health insurance, or
Mhm,
health risk more than health insurance. And one of the things that's really grown over the last number of years in health is a form of risk sharing. What happens is the insurance companies take the basic risk. They will sell a product, you pay them a
mhm,
premium, and they basically guarantee that they're going to cover everything you need. All you can eat
mhm.
buffet of American healthcare. Um,
Absolutely.
and they've learned that this is in some ways not a great business because the margins are very, very tiny. There's huge
Yeah.
dollars, tiny margins. And so
Mhm,
there's grown up this whole field of value-based contracting. And what that means essentially is the insurers are transferring some of that risk to the providers of medical services. So
mhm,
primary care physicians, specialty physicians, hospitals, and whatnot are essentially sharing risk with the insurance
mhm,
companies. And the contracts that underlie this are really complicated. But the last company I founded was specialized in this, and the software that we developed was for use by parties who are contracting around this kind of risk. Is
mhm.
this the kind of risk sharing that you're involved in, or do you have an application that you think might fit in this particular space?
Yeah, and I'd have to see the details of the contracts too, about specifically how they're transferring the risks. But basically, we have two different ways that we look at it. There's one approach that says, okay, at time zero, or in the first period, we decide on the functions that we're going to use to transfer these risks when they happen at the end. And nobody pays anything right now. We just agree on what those
Yeah.
functions are going to be. And then at the end, we determine what the risks are and we divide it up so that everybody's risk is covered. That's one way of doing risk sharing. And the other way of doing risk sharing is this new, it's called compensation based. This is Jan in my paper, where we look at ex ante, people pay, up front, uh, what they pay into a pool essentially.
Yeah.
And so you
Yeah.
have a pool of all these insured policyholders, and you have one party that takes the opposite end of the risk. So if nobody has a claim, then the other party gets to absorb the pool. And so that's like your financial liquidity provider that comes in. They contribute to the pool, and then if there's no claims, then they end up with all the money. And then all of the rest of the people will split the pool according to their claims at the end. But all you ever have is that pool up front. And so you have to really do the premium calculations up front. But again, it's a simple idea. That's one way of doing risk sharing, is to contribute up front, and then at the end you divide the pool among everybody. And then on the flip side, it's you don't contribute anything up front, but then at the end you have to contribute and then divide so that everybody's covered. And so those are the two ways of kind of this mutual aid. But what you're describing is it's a little bit different, these value based things, because you're on the one hand you're sharing the risk, but on the other hand it's kind of a profit sharing mechanism too that's
Yeah,
involved in those contracts.
it's
Yeah,
more like gain sharing. And that's the way
yeah,
contracts work. So you set some sort of target, and then if you come in under the target, you split the difference.
yeah, yeah, absolutely. And so that's a different kind of contract than some of the stuff that we do, where it's just kind of these mutual aid deals. But it's similar in spirit enough that you could look at it under that lens. And
Right.
I'd have to take that back and talk to Jan about it, but I'll get back with you on
That's
on kind of an
interesting.
idea
Yeah.
there. That's really interesting. Yeah.
I've been working on a paper with a colleague, Gareth Peters, who holds my chair at the university. And what we're looking at is, how do you predict what the ultimate settlement is going to be? Because there's an accounting problem. Companies
Mhm.
cannot book gains until they're actually realized, unless
Right.
they can accurately predict them. And so we're
Yeah.
looking at ways, essentially a predictive modeling, reserving kind of way, to predict what the
Mhm.
ultimate settlement will be.
Yeah, and that's that takes kind of into account all of the kind of new predictive models and that sort of stuff. That's interesting too.
So
So
you're
yeah.
sitting there in Canada, so you probably don't get exposed much to health insurance. But here in the United States, it's a huge business.
Well, I'm pretty good friends with a bunch of folks down in Florida that work on health insurance, and so I get to hear from them from time to time. I got a few people. I was really interested about a year ago in risk adjustment. I never actually followed up with a full project on that. But that's really what people don't realize. That's a form of risk sharing that goes on between these insurance companies, and that's maybe the most that's maybe the largest form of risk sharing that takes place anywhere in the on the globe. But there's a lot of problems with the way that they do it, because they're not taking into account probability of default and time value of money and a lot of other things. And it's not very optimal the way that they necessarily have that set up. And that's something that I was talking with couple of different people on last year, and I sat in on an NAIC meeting where they were talking about some of the risk adjustment stuff. But that's kind of the most that I take a look at health insurance is in that respect. I haven't thought about some of these other things that you're saying.
Well, risk adjustment is a big business in health insurance. I wrote a book
Yeah.
about it. It's actually a textbook on the health fellowship exams.
Well, yeah, I did the QFI track, so I didn't see
Yeah, I
that
know.
one.
You don't need to worry about it. But
I'll have a look. I'll have a look.
young health actuaries know who I am because they've had to read the book.
Absolutely. Absolutely. Well,
Let's
there you go.
let's stop again.